5:30. We will stand for the pledge, please. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I think he had it set, and I think I messed it
Okay, today is Monday, October 12th, 2020. The time being 5:30 p.m. The special advertised meeting of the Board of Works is called to order. At this time, please silence all electronic devices. To comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests that participants in this meeting complete a voluntary anonymous survey that is available on the table in the back of the room. Brenda, if you please call the roll.
Jamie Kane,
Here.
Rodney King,
Here.
Glenn Tebby,
Here.
Karen D. Rust. Here.
Okay, there being no old business, we will go directly to new business. Chief Stoermer is here. We have a personnel request. Chief, if you please tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, good evening. In lieu of the employee being here, due to some austere circumstances, I am requesting on his behalf, employee 825 be granted a leave of absence for no more than 180 days as per the city fire department handbook. This would allow the city to pay for our portion of his health insurance while he is on leave. At that 180 days, then it is revisited. Per the handbook, a fire department member cannot take a leave of absence for more than 180 days. And at that point, we are hoping things have come to a resolution.
With it being a personnel matter, we keep it fairly confidential. Any questions for the chief? If not, we entertain a motion to approve that, please.
So moved.
Moved by Jamie, is there a second? Seconded by Dee. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Next on our agenda, we have Washington Township Trustee Christian Rust. He is back with us this evening. Last week we had our conversation about the contract. How I think it probably is best for us to approach this evening. We'll hear an update from you, sort of where we are, if you will. And then I think it is best if we focus on contractual terms first and then discuss the monetary compensation component. That way we can focus on two things. We can focus on one thing at a time. So with that, good evening.
Hello. Okay. So we have made some updates to the fire contract. I met with a couple of board members and discussed some of those changes I'd like to see made. And you have questions for me?
What is your plan going forward? So tonight we want to hopefully reach an agreement on the contract, but there could be another component to this. Is that accurate?
Yes, so this is essentially option, I guess we'll call this option 2. Option 1 is what we talked about last Monday, and I would like to explain to some counselors a little bit more of what the benefits of that are to them.
That being option 1.
Yes.
So this evening we have option 2. All of you have an opportunity to review that. Again, our goal this evening, in my opinion, would be for us to reach an agreement when we leave here this evening. That is option 2, pending your conversation with council members and potentially another conversation with them next month. So any questions for Trustee Rust on what has been proposed to you this evening?
Well, guess this weird. I appreciate some of the changes that you made. Most were ones that I had pointed out, and I'm grateful for that. There's a couple others that I did point out that weren't changed. I'd like to go through some of those. Before we get there, one of the things that I noticed, and it's also part of this other conversation with regard to the next step two, but this agreement between the township and the city, longstanding, has been that the township provides some equipment and helps to pay a portion of the costs. And I noticed in this whereas, that's not there. It's that you're willing to provide equipment in support of such services, but it doesn't mention anything about helping out with paying a portion of the cost of the city. And as far as I know, and maybe that conversation has taken place with others and been agreed to, but it's not been agreed to from the standpoint of, ever from my standpoint, from the Board of Works. The next whereas, where you delete that part of that sentence, compound sentence there, thank you for that. My question is on that one, and it's just, it may be semantics, but you say request of additional firefighting equipment. Really, you are for replacement of firefighting equipment, right? You're not adding anything or replacing things. And I don't know whether that's important or not, just pointing that out, that that's not.
In what we're purchasing for you, we are purchasing an additional set of auto extrication tools to be used, and some other odds and ends equipment
Okay.
that are in that.
Okay, very good. Wasn't aware of that. I was told there's only focused on what's identified here as 2 trucks.
Right.
I'm glad, I trust that when an agreement is finalized, numbers 6 and 7 are removed, that would not be included in part of the contract, right? They're just listed there as 6 and 7, and it says removed per council action, and removed per council action. That's not gonna stay in the final contract, is it?
It's up to you. I was going to move, just so we knew kind of what had happened and why they can come back later. Because to be completely frank, I'm trying to avoid the necessity of continuously negotiating this contract year after year and not knowing why we did something the year before or why a number is a certain way. I'm happy to strike that from the end contract and then just repaginate.
Well, it just was a puzzle to me why it was there when there's nothing in it. So, in terms of the contract, so, okay. Number 9, where that first sentence in 9, that I think I mentioned to you before, I don't know why you maintained it.
You're talking about number 8.
Well, number 8 now is the old number 9, I'm sorry, yeah, I apologize. Number 8 now, the first sentence in what is now number 8. I had mentioned that to you before.
Right.
I elected to retain it because I believe it's a worthwhile provision for both parties. I believe when I originally wrote it, it was at the end of the sentence because the purpose of that paragraph is to discuss what happens if the department should request additional, during the course of a year, the department says, hey, I need this thing, and I would like you to help us pay for it. So then the procedure would then be, assuming you're gonna use the same competitive bid process as we look for and why they are, and if we have any, if the township has any, not we, if the township has any procurement procedures, that is being followed as well. So my intent behind that particular sentence was to make any DLGF person later that looks at it and goes, well, okay, both parties have said they're going to follow competitive bidding and procurement policies that they have, bully for them. So I think originally I intended it to be at the end of the paragraph. I don't recall why it got moved to the beginning of the paragraph, but that was its intention, is to,
Well, maybe it ought to be clear then that if the department or the township agrees to cooperate or to purchase equipment for us, then we would do so with those things in mind and consistent with the policies. But the first sentence here, the way it reads that we have to do it no matter what.
well,
And-
and I can appreciate that.
And so I think it should begin in the event, blah, blah, and of course we've got that if, I don't know if it's even necessary, but that's fine that it's there. But then I would say, if the department or the township agrees to purchase, then we would do it so competitively and so on.
That's fine, I can add that and move that sentence to the end.
Thank you. Number 14. I would propose a slightly different way of doing this. How about this for a way to, it means the same thing, I think, in terms of being cooperative with one another. When advantageous or when beneficial, the city and township agree to work cooperatively to solicit grant funding from appropriate funding sources in order to defer the cost of providing fire protection and emergency services. I think that says what is intended, but it does it in less didactic way.
Could you give me that sentence again, please?
Sure. When advantageous or beneficial, I'm not sure which word's better, or maybe advantageous and beneficial. The city and the township agree to work cooperatively to solicit grant funding from appropriate funding sources in order to defer the cost of providing fire protection and emergency services, period.
So really, we're just changing shall to should. I mean, that's the goal, right, is we're not required to do it, but we will do it.
What we're saying is that we agree to work cooperatively to get things together, when necessary, when beneficial, when it's advantageous for either or both of us.
Any other members have any comments or concerns on that change? Okay.
And then, I'll skip 15 for a moment and go to 16. And I see you made that change. Again, I would offer a slightly different version. The city agrees that the township and so forth shall have access to all fire equipment and tools owned by the township for the purpose of inspection and evaluation. The way it's written is a little more clumsy, and it also clarifies that it's specifying all fire equipment and tools owned by the township for the purpose of inspection and evaluation.
So the issue that I have with that particular wordage is that it doesn't permit someone to access a building where equipment is being held. So basically it leads to a potential argument of, you can see your equipment all you want, but you can't see where it's housed, you can't see how it's maintained, you can't see anything other than your equipment, which I think is
Well, has that ever been a problem? I mean, part of this is, the reason I think this is funny is because we've never had, there's never been an issue before, ever.
You're absolutely right, and I mean, maybe that is the answer, is that it has never been an issue. However, I make my living guessing what's gonna be an issue. And sometimes I'm right, and sometimes I'm wrong, but I still guess it for both of them. So that was the reason
Okay.
it's worded that way, but if the entities would like me to remove it, I will
Well,
write
I
it your
mean,
way.
I don't know, to any and all fire protection buildings, equipment and tools, then insert thereafter tools owned by the township, because that's where that belongs, for the purpose of inspection and evaluation of said equipment. Or township's equipment, better said.
Sure.
That's legally, but the township's equipment.
Chief, do you have any issues granting access to the buildings should a request come in a timely and appropriate manner?
No, timely and appropriate is the only thing, is to make arrangements of what they want to see, or even if it's a surprise, just during business hours.
Any other members have preference on the building? I understand Chris's point. I would be okay with leaving buildings in there from
I can leave
accessible.
buildings if we're, it's just the any and all, it's kind of like, it opens it up for, I can do, and again, it's never been a problem. It presumes that there will be, or there could be, and so, maybe we need to put, in a timely manner, or in a regular business hours, or some way to,
What if I put prior to the initiation of the sentence? What if I said, upon reasonable request?
yeah, fine. And now I'll go jump back to 15. This is a significant departure from, and it was, I noted it last year, but it's a significant departure from what we've done in the past. And my concern is that there's more than, there's costs beyond the depreciation of the equipment that's used to go to a fire. And if we're recovering costs from fighting a fire, it seems to me that those dollars ought to go back to replace the kinds of firefighting things, and I don't know what they are, but firefighting things that men and women use to fight fires that get depleted or get broken or get worn out or whatever, so that that money can be used to replace and pay for those expenses, rather than going back to the general fund for any other purpose, or to your fund for equipment, or for other uses in other ways. So I really like the idea of that being reinserted, that previously had through 2018, is that the money is going to go back to the fire department. If it does not go to the fire department, then it does go to the general fund, and we do prepare a proportional share to the township. I just think that's,
So what if on a run, something that is owned by the township breaks and money is recovered?
well, depends on what it is. If it's just normal maintenance, then we're already at, for the expense of that. If it's something, and maybe we say if the truck is damaged in some way, that some of those monies would be used to repair that truck. That makes sense to me, but,
Wouldn't your insurance cover something like that?
well, hopefully your insurance would.
We're on your insurance.
You're insuring the truck, your trucks, right?
We're on your policy, we pay you.
Run the city halls.
Oh, okay.
But we receive financial compensation.
Right, we pay, yeah.
In
Well,
case
then if
of-
the insurance covers it, the insurance covers it.
Chief, do you know what happens now if we receive financial some insurance company pays this money, you may have to come to the night just to report it. But what happens to that money?
Sure, so if we do bill, and currently the only thing that we bill for is hazardous materials cleanup from a car accident. And if we do bill, then that money goes into our hazmat fund. Currently, I only have two funds that I can distribute funds into, and that's our fire safety fund, and Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, or our hazmat fund.
That's correct.
So most of the time it goes into our hazmat fund because that then buys oil, dry, and cleanup supplies and things like that. Currently, we have never elected to bill insurance. We can bill a flat fee of $500 for a structure fire. If your house catches on fire, Indiana law allows us to bill your homeowner's insurance $500. That's all we can bill. If that money would come in, then it would come to either depending on who the check was honestly made out to, whether it's the city of Greensburg or the Greensburg Fire Department, it probably depends on who gets it. It would either go into our hazmat fund or our fire safety fund, because I cannot put money into any other fund. Unless it's deposited to the city, then it goes to the general fund, and then I'm supposing it could be transferred to a different line item in the department, but that's a few more hoops to jump through.
Well, but it would go to the department.
Correct, correct.
Okay. I just,
Well, and I would say, I don't recall that I was the person that actually drafted that. I think that was something that Chris and I worked out before. I don't recall that being a big sticking point and talking point that I recall from the prior negotiation. So I don't know what y'all's answer to that is. If you don't like it, I can strike it. I just left it in there because I believe it states a proportionate share if the equipment was used, which to me then limits the exposure that the city has. So you're not doing it on every run. Like if you were, and it sounds like from what the chief is saying, I don't know that this is a huge,
It may not
be a huge issue. It may not be.
it jumped out because of I know what we've done before, and I know that we have, in the past, years ago, there have been funds that have been recovered and they've been put back into the fire department, basically, not necessarily, might have gone into the general fund, but they go back, transfer, and make an
Sure.
allocation to transfer them
Sure.
into the fire department to cover the expenses of the fire costs, to fight fire.
Right.
I think if we left that alone and could deal with that on an as-needed basis, because we can't just throw it in the hazmat fund, because that's specified what we have to use it for.
Correct.
So we'd have to go through creating a whole new fund.
Yeah.
Well, and if I may, we could add after so in that paragraph, after funds recovered shall be deposited to the city's general fund, we could add for the purpose of recouping any costs incurred for just any costs incurred, and then after the and any excess
That's,
should be distributed and any excess should be distributed to the township from the general fund.
in proportional.
Yeah, from the general fund to the township in proportionate, based on a proportionate share of the cost. That'd be correct.
Thank you.
That's good.
Well,
Christian, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Other board members okay with that?
Based on a proportionate share of the cost. So I can redline that
Okay.
and add that language.
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
I got two other items I want to bring up. One is this whole idea of an automatic renewal. That may be something that others want to comment on. I'm not sure that that's I'm not sure we have to, until the great change last year, it's never been something that's been a difficult thing to do. All right?
Agreed.
All right, it's been something that's very, very, almost automatic, but at least it's brought before people's attention and everybody knows what's what. I think there's value in it.
Give me a history of this. Why was it changed?
I don't know, it was
Why was
changed,
there a big change last year?
you have to ask these gentlemen, I don't know.
There was a lot of gray area in it, from a legal standpoint and as far as whose responsibility is what, they needed to spell out more of that and did not do that in prior contracts.
Do you remember what the vote on that was?
For last year, I think it was unanimous, that it made a change, yeah, it was unanimous.
Okay.
In the last item, the baby box thing, and again, I'm not opposed to it, I don't know what has been gone through, if there's even appropriate places and all that kind of thing. The part in here that bothers me is that we're agreeing to comply with all third-party procedures and policies related to the safety device, and that's okay, but then we strike out because, you know, if we're gonna have one, obviously we want to make sure that it's appropriately done, but then we strike out here this whole business about this department and city coming together to make sure that it can be accommodated and we can accommodate the requirements of it and so forth.
And I think when I misinterpreted Christian's, because so Christian spoke with you over the weekend and sent me a Word version of this with comments of, member Teddy has an issue with this, and member Teddy would like to bring this to our attention. I think I misunderstood what he was saying in terms of what you were trying to say as far as the that it may have some inconsistent language. And so I thought by striking that, I was removing the inconsistency that you were talking of. But as I thought about it more today, and based on ongoing discussions that have been happening, I think that I should have left that sentence in there and then just come here and explain to you what I was intending to do, which is the intention of this paragraph is that the city in sentence 2 says that it will agree to allow the device to be placed on its real property.
If
Then, yeah, and we can add a paragraph to that that says assuming, or add a sentence there that says, assuming compliance feasibility is found.
Well, that's what I thought this last thing did.
And that's what I meant it to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I interpreted it as, that it has to be something that we believe we can do and do well and do right, and it has to be in the right place and so forth.
Yes, that's what I meant for that to, that's how I meant that to
Well,
be
if we can
interpreted.
clarify that, that's what I want. I mean, that's what I think it's appropriate. I mean, not just that I want, I think that's what in the best interest of the city as well as
Yes, and I think
the
that,
township.
I think by adding that back in, I may look at it and see if there's another place where I might tweak that language, but generally speaking, the intent of that, which I think is what everyone agrees to, is that the township wants that to happen and is going to be responsible for procuring the third-party provider and paying for that and not burdening the city. The city is agreeing that it will allow this to happen on real property that it owns, that the department accesses. The department will then meet with the third-party provider to ensure that compliance can be met, and if they can't, then the city can elect whether or not it's going to proceed forward.
That's what I would like to see. Yeah.
Okay, and that,
Because I think that's in everybody's best interest,
agree.
even the baby box.
I agree.
People. Okay. Well, those are my things with regard to language and so on. And as I said, initially, that gets to the second part, number 2.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments or thoughts on, Christian, thoughts on the actual language? Because again, we're trying to reach a document that we can get cleaned up and present at the November Board of Works meeting that could be approved. So we don't want to go through this all the way through December or have another one pending your conversation with council members and me.
Question.
Yes, sir.
I stayed for the council meeting the other week. And a comment came up, and there wasn't a vote on it, but the statement was made to the effect that the city of Greensburg doesn't need the township's help, that they provide nothing to the city of Greensburg. Okay? Now, if I understand correctly, the township is providing 2 vehicles, one being a tanker, and the other is,
Rescue.
and then you're going to provide extrication equipment. Chief Stoermer, do either of those 2 vehicles provide any savings for the city of Greensburg?
Absolutely. I would make mention too, the way the township provides a brush truck as well, that is pretty much exclusively used in the city for nuisance fires. So there's an additional piece of apparatus. The addition, the tanker kind of helps out the county, and makes us a team player for the rest of Decatur County. The rescue engine releases or reduces the burden of our other engine that we're going to start switching kind of 50-50, so that one's not being run into the ground while the other one just sits there. So yes.
Do we have any property within the city limits of Greensburg that's not an appropriate distance from a fire hydrant?
We do have a few of those areas, yes.
And so it would be important to have a tanker truck for those people.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to clarify that I think there's a need for this contract to go forward.
And I think that it has been a great relationship for many, many years, and I do like to see the relationship continue in a very positive way.
So let me pose a last question. So the township decides to withdraw from this contract. You know, after we talk it all out, if they decide to withdraw from it, where does that leave the city?
In which, is it in a fire coverage conversation? We refer to the chief on that. Chief, you may want to, from a maybe best practices or things like that.
So initially, it does more initially than it does long-term. And it doesn't necessarily affect real property per se, as it affects morale, as it affects the, it comes back to my leadership, it comes back to the leadership of the city and the county, to the members of the department, which then will affect morale. We will have to withdraw from some automatic aid agreements with the county and those county fire departments. With the loss of that tanker, we will not necessarily we don't really have a whole lot to offer them in stored water or hauled water. So we would have to reduce what we do there, which then would reduce what they provide for us as well. So I think that we would see it more, instead of real property, we would see more of the intellectual property and more of the good working relationship. We would see that falter. You know, obviously it's going to heighten the opinions of others for what actions are taken, which as a leader would make it hard to kind of rein some of that in, A, what I don't know about, and B, the issue of morale and things like that. You know, those guys are looking forward to 2 brand new trucks. Firemen like bright, shiny things, and to lose that would also be, you know, somewhat of a hit. Our department members have put in a lot of time and effort traveling to see these things being built, so they would lose that sense of purpose, and they would lose that somewhat of a sense of identity of that's what they got to build and then it was taken from them.
How long is this relationship of give and take between the Washington Township Fire Department from the city of Greensburg Fire Department?
Oh, I'd say a significant, I don't know the actual number, I'd say a significant period of time.
Well, I was thinking.
But I would say that, I think that the Washington Township Trustee's Office has had a fire service contract of some nature with the department or with the city for decades.
Decades upon decades.
Yeah, I would say substantially. Now, and I will note, in answer to your prior question, which I thought Christian answered admirably, is when I was brought the original contract that had pre-existed in 2018, I reviewed it and found it to be problematic from an ambiguity standpoint, which means that if it were to be litigated at some point, it had not previously been, but if it were to be litigated, it left both entities with issues in terms of what a court might be able to do. So the intent of this was not to create controversy or to create issue, it was to try and to update a document that I believe had been years and years of just kind of gunning through the same mill to make it better. And something that we can now say, look, this is the foundation upon which we are going to continue building into the future. And I think that that both of these gentlemen are focused on building their individual municipalities in a way that is good for the future and is trying to build a foundation on which we can move forward. I think that is the intention of all of the people in this room, to reach an accord that allows us to have a foundation on which we can move forward, including getting Chief Stoermer his shiny trucks.
Do you think we're there?
I think we're very close.
Okay.
In terms of a foundation, I like this document. I will be the first person to say this is not the first time Member Tebby and I have gone back and forth over language, and I find it exhilarating, honestly. I enjoy it to try and think through the language of it, and he does a very good job of analyzing it. So I think with his suggestions, that this is an even better document than it was to begin with, and an even better document than was granted and approved in 2019. Now, what you all do in terms of money, I think there is absolutely a common ground. And I think that I have personally made notes in my own mental journal of how to handle situations. This one becomes a chapter that I'm going to change how I do some things moving forward to ensure that we don't have this before, and bring some of the stakeholders together sooner to have that discussion.
Just maybe a comment or two is, one, I think the comment from the council meeting the other night, I think was a bit misplaced. I think there's definitely a mutual benefit to both parties by having a contract.
But did you hear that comment?
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with Christian about it. I think that comment's inaccurate, right?
Okay.
So, I think the point that council member was trying to make, it was poorly made, but maybe what he was trying to say is, worst case, if we don't have this, we can still cover the city of Greensburg, right? And I think that was maybe more the point he was trying to make, right? There's definitely a benefit to both parties by having this contract and having an agreement here, absolutely. Maybe the other comment, I agree with Mr. Tebby about not having the automatic renewal, but I think we should find something in this contract so we don't have to sit here and renew this again in 2 months. So maybe we go ahead and take this year and next year in this contract.
Yeah, I agree with
Yeah,
you.
and then that way we're not redoing that, and then we come back to it in 2022.
Correct.
But there's absolutely a benefit to both parties by having it, this contract and working with Washington Township. It provides a benefit to the city, but I think we also provide a benefit to the township as well.
Jamie, I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
So as I prepare this, it sounds like what the board is suggesting is that in the paragraph regarding renewability, that I simply strike everything after the 2021, and then we can revisit it then. Is that fair?
Okay, any other comments, again, upon sort of redrafting, this will be the language we would like to move forward with. So any other comments on that? Okay, if not, we will move on to the financial component of the contract. Historically, we've been at 140,000, been the number for years. Apparently, there was some, maybe you want to talk about how we got there, maybe.
So historically, that number came to help pay for the salaries of 3 firefighters. And so that's how the number came up. Now, obviously, we changed salary rates that no longer would cover the salary, benefits, and insurance for 3 firefighters, but that's where that number came from. So, you know, that money, it does go to the general fund, but that general fund is what pays for those, you know, the fire department's salaries, or the fund is coming out of that general fund. And I guess they come to us in October and say, hey, I know you were under the impression you're getting 140, but I'm only gonna give you 50. It's a bit of, you know, a smack in the face is how I look at that. I mean, we based our budget this year off that anticipation, understanding that in good faith, you know, and we provided the service that we agreed to, you know, work, knowing that we'd work through a contract of some sort. So I think that's a bit problematic, right? And then if we say we determine that 50,000 that's the right dollar amount, I mean, we have to seriously look at our manpower and our head count, because that's what that money goes to help fund in the general fund. And that's actually, we added, I think, I went back and I was asking, I think it was 13, 14, and 15, our firefighters 13, 14, and 15, so this is how long ago it was. We added those 3 firefighters to the rolls. Now we're up to 30, but we added 3 firefighters when we initiated this contract.
So does it say that in the last 18 contract, that's what that's specifically?
No, I think the comment, like Lyndon made a comment about how it helps fund or pay for, it doesn't specifically say that you're paying the salaries of 3 firefighters. That's kind of how it got initiated, how it got discussed, and the wording was more that you're helping to pay or support the fire department.
I'll read it to you if you want me to. It says, purpose of agreement is to provide for firefighting services for Washington Township through the fire department of the city of Greensburg, and to provide for payment by Washington Township of a portion of the cost of said fire department. It didn't specify, I mean, it didn't say what's going to, in part, that was to your advantage, because we've left the figure the same, even though our costs have increased over the years. So it's true, to your point, a little ambiguity. Yeah, but it was more like a gentleman's agreement that, yes, we're going to provide resources so that you will have the manpower and the equipment and whatever else is necessary to fight fires. Over and above, in addition to whatever equipment you provide.
How did you come up with that you need 3 firefighters to cover the unincorporated area of the township?
I think they came up with 3 firefighters because that's typically what you need at a minimum to respond to an event. So, you know, somebody's got to operate the pump, you're going to have maybe 2 people at least on the hose. So it was an initial response team to a scene, and that's, I believe, how they came up with the 3. This was long before my time.
Yeah,
But
I just don't know.
so when I went back and I asked about it, that was the explanation that I was given, that it was a minimum of a 3-man team to at least make an initial response.
But that you would only need 3 additional men if you had to respond to in the township and in the city at the same time. 'Cause
Well,
have
if you
people
made a response in the township for a fire, you have to have a minimum of 3 people.
Yeah, but you're paying someone, you're paying 3 people full-time to respond to how many calls in the township? They're not going out there every day.
No. But the same with the city, we're not fighting a fire in the city every day, and I hope that we don't, but we still are paying for that service because it protects our communities, right? And that's why we're paying for that
I think
service.
the 3 firemen is kind of a loss
That's just, I just think that's
over
an odd way to come up with a number.
Well, so, yeah, so let's,
past, because we're not talking about trying to cover any particular thing. We're trying to cover a portion of the cost of expenses of the department.
The cost of the department to protect Washington Township.
which I think
Can
is,
help.
which is,
Yeah.
I think, probably generating a lot of the issue, right? It's because it's not tied to something.
Sure.
It is just an abstract number at this point.
Well, one abstract to begin with,
Right, but at this
So-
point, it kind of is. So, Christian, where did you come up with the $50,000?
So we got the number for about $50,000 from Chief Stoermer when we asked what the cost of providing service is. So we get a call report every year, the township does, and for example, in 2019 there were 78 calls. A fair amount of them were auto extrication. I'll get that into that in a second. But so if you were to divide $140,000 by 78, that's $1,600. I'm not doing math standing up here, and which is very high. And then when you deduct from that some of those were auto extrication calls, which the city fire department provides to everyone in the county for free using our equipment. That's kind of why I think that it makes sense to go down to this number.
It's not the entire county, but yes.
Right.
What?
Let's has their own
Let's has-
equipment, and I
okay.
don't know if they cover Westport as well, I believe.
Yeah.
They assist
So-
Westport.
So Let's has their own equipment, but per the county contract, the way it's written, dispatch still sends the city of Greensburg on those calls. We are disregarded, but we will provide extrication coverage for Westport as well, yes.
Chief, how many runs did we do in 2019? Did you say, Christian? So, 78 runs in 19?
That's correct, 78 runs in 2019. And while it's unpopular, and while I stand here and proverbial shoot myself in the foot with Councilman Kane about $140,000, I would like to say that I will not lie. It's against the Fire Chief Code of Ethics and against my personal beliefs, just to get that number. When Trustee Russ comes to me and says, how many runs am I making? I can't make numbers do magical things to come up with that amount of money. I'm also shooting my own budget in the foot by saying that. So when I do that, I would rather be truthful, and I would rather be upstanding and have a good relationship with that than I would try to fabricate some numbers that benefit one side or another.
I don't think anybody's asked you to fabricate numbers or tell a dishonest truth. So I think the way you're making that statement makes it sound like we're pressuring you to make a dishonest statement.
No,
I was asking though, when we come up with $50,000, how much of that had to do with, maybe there's a portion of your salary that should be taken out of that. There's a portion of our mechanics' salaries that should be taken out of that for maintaining their vehicles, right? There's other costs involved rather than just the percentage of runs. And the fact that there's a full-time firefighters on service to make those calls, the quicker they're gonna get there, the better, the more property they're gonna save, right? The better service they're gonna get. So their service they're gonna get is much better than that of a volunteer fire service because they're gonna be able to respond right away and be there right away. I think there's indirect costs that weren't calculated in that number at all. And that's what I'm upset with.
those
I
costs
think
were-
your comment though comes out acting like I was insinuating you should be dishonest. I don't
No,
think that's ever.
absolutely not at all, because I did calculate those costs in there. Because our mechanics receive stipends for the jobs that they do. Last year, actually this year, we have spent $5,113 on general maintenance for township apparatus only. Per the contract, that is to be paid by us, and Trustee Russ will take catastrophic. So adding up the runs we make, the only thing that's not in that $50,000, because I don't know what was done previous. You've apparently had to go back and ask other people that were probably familiar with that to make those,
It was before me.
to do that. So I have a contract that I go by. That contract doesn't say anything about personnel. If we talk personnel, $140,000, will get you about 2 personnel. It's about $70,000 with time we add benefits and everything else in there. If we don't add that stuff in there, then you know you're looking at around $80,000 for 2 guys, so you might be able to squeak that other one in, and that's just because of inflation and cost of living increases as well. So realistically, we do that. Mayor Marsh and I talked about some numbers. If you look at the number of total runs, which was around 1,400, divided by the 78 calls that we made to Washington Township last year, that adds up to be somewhere around $120,000 if you would do the math that way.
As part of the whole budget.
As part of the whole, yes, as part of the whole fire department budget, taking the $2.4 million fire department budget and divvying it out that way. That does get you a higher number. However, we share apparatus. Major mechanical stuff is done by that. Fuel is paid by us. The fuel for those trucks was added in that $50,000. So yes, that $50,000 was well thought out by myself and not just shot from the hip.
Can you send me that, how you figured it in the breakdown?
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's nothing to say that the costs that were incurred last year or this year will be the same as next year.
That's correct. There's going to be, fuel is obviously going to fluctuate.
Remember